I am delighted to be joined by Dr. Phil Parker today. Thank you, Phil, for taking time to be with us. You are one of the presenters at the NLP Conference in 2024, and your topic this year is the art and power of storytelling, which I already love the sound of. So do please start by telling us a little bit more about yourself and your presentation.
Okay, well, thanks for inviting me both to this meeting and the conference. It's great to be back again. So I'm Dr. Phil. I have a PhD in the psychology of health. I've been working in NLP since the 1980s. Developed something called the lightning process, which is about how people can use NLP and other based skills to transform chronic health issues. And this year I'm talking about stories and storytelling. And one of the reasons I've done that is if you've ever been to one of my lectures or seminars, I will tell stories in it on lots of levels. So I'll often do a kind of long form story where I'll guide people through some experience, and people at the end often go, "Oh, that was so nice. Can we do that again?" So people love that side of it, and a lot of that for me comes from my training in Ericksonian hypnotherapy, which of course most people in NLP have an understanding of. So that was my first training, was as an Ericksonian hypnotherapist and psychotherapist. So it's those kind of long form stories are very interesting. The short stories where you just use a very brief metaphor like, how does change work? And you have a little story about how change works. And one of the fascinating things about it is how much stories communicate in a completely different way. So I'm looking into the research behind why stories work, what they do to your brain, because they do something very different from literal stories. So there's some research into one of the reasons Trump won the election over Hillary Clinton was she was very rational and explained things like this is what will happen in fiscal terms, in terms of the cost ratio benefits, very well explained, and people went, "Oh, excellent." And then Trump would say, "China is using America as a piggy bank," and people would go, "I really understand that, though." So what they found was that much more emotion was being triggered in people's neurology, and the simplicity of it meant they could talk about it in a much more clear way. So looking at some of the research into why these things work, what happens in our brain, what's going on in our neurochemistry, and also how do you create compelling stories that help people make change that are either short or long, and communicating on multiple different levels within the story. So the story itself, what the story might mean, the journey of the story, but then also the other ways that you can communicate at the same time. So all that stuff and probably more.
Wonderful. So what practical learnings will delegates take away from your session?
So you'll be able to really have a great sense of how we make stories, what we can do to create compelling stories that allow change to occur in your clients, whether they're very short ones or long ones. We'll look a bit as well at the other side of stories, which is that we all run stories about ourselves, about the world. Our map territory thing is really the story we have. So digging into some of that and supporting all the stuff you already do. So what I'll often say to my students is, do a process that we may know, meta mirror, whatever it is, parts, and always finish with a story. Because what that can do is then, because it's like activating different neurology, if our process is on one piece, then the side track, the parallel track of the story will support and deepen that experience for people.
Oh, okay. So is there anything that delegates need to do before your session so that they can either have a deeper understanding during the session or get a deeper experience from that session?
Yeah, a couple of things I recommend. First of all, have a look through your Kindle or your books on your shelf, some of which you might even have read, and particularly novels. Have a look at how the books start. How do they start? Pay attention to that first of all, because how a story starts is really important.
Yeah.
And the second thing it says is Bring the curiosity of a wolf.
Curiosity of a wolf.
Wolf.
That sounds interesting, and that creates a story in itself, doesn't it?
Well, that is an example of a single sentence story. Bring the curiosity of a wolf. What you naturally do is go, what, how, why, what does that mean? Well, why don't, that's part of the skill of storytelling, is to engage neurology. It's like change processes. To create some of the magic that allows us to think beyond the obvious step-by-step instructions to something that's a bit different, a bit intriguing. There's a great example of storytelling. One of my favorite beginnings of storytelling is The Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And the story begins, the very first line is, Marley was dead to begin with. As you look at that story, unless his opening line was something very similar to that, you're like, well, we know what happens when people are dead. They're dead. So the presupposition to begin with that something happened afterwards that wasn't dead is an intriguing start to that story.
Actually, you were just saying that's like back in the days when I used to buy real books rather than use them on my Kindle or whatever. It was that I would go into the bookshop. If I was looking for fiction reading to take on holiday, I would read the first page, and if it had captured my attention in the first page, it went into the shopping basket, and if it hadn't, that was it, back on the shelf again.
Well, it's interesting at the moment. So many of you know that I'm a musician. If you have a song on Spotify, and I have a few tracks I've released on Spotify, there's a very famous song called "Baby I Love the Way" by Peter Frampton, which people may have heard of. He has had 55 million plays on Spotify, right? And he's earned, do you know how much he's earned? £1,500.
No.
Because the royalties you get from Spotify are tiny. And he probably doesn't know the rights to the song. So Spotify, how it calculates your money is it only counts if someone listens for 30 seconds, right?
Right.
So if you listen for 29 seconds, you don't even get the 0.005 pence.
Yeah.
And that has changed how people write music. So now people don't have a long start. They have to get your attention, like your novels, have to get your attention with like 30 seconds. And so that's changed the shape of how people write music because of that particular algorithm that Spotify did. So the responses we have to events are very interesting. The stories that are coming to us as well from people saying, look at this. If we look at social media is very, very interested in getting us to be outraged. So it likes stories that are outrageous or make us feel negatively excitable. It will put them to the top of your feed to get you engaged. And that's a big part of story as well, is like, what stories are we being sold? Can we resist some of those stories? We were talking before about healthcare, when people say, oh yeah, you will need this, second operation. You're like, I will, or is that I may? These are all stories too. So the stories are everywhere, starting to really see the power of stories and how we can use that to make change.
Yes, absolutely. So what inspired you, Phil, to want to present at the conference?
I always love presenting the conference. As you know, I did a big presentation last time, and it was one of the highlights of the year, actually, being in the room with all those people, spending some time with like-minded souls, not having to explain what NLP is as a start. That thing where you're, what's NLP? You don't have to do that on the conference. That's a good place to be. And helping people to deepen their skills and really recognize that they have so much already, and it could be even more than they might imagine.
Yes. Oh, that's lovely. Thank you, Phil. Thank you. So as I've mentioned, Phil is presenting at the conference in 2024. His topic is the art and power of storytelling. And Phil, you're presenting at 9 a.m, nice and bright and early, on Sunday, the 11th of February. So very much looking forward to that, and looking forward to enjoying some stories as part of the presentation. Thank you so much, Phil.
Thanks, Karen.